Thank you, Seva, and thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm very excited to be at this conference. I can see some names from back home, which is also very nice. So today I'm going to tell you about the BEARS project in which I've been working at Deborah Bicker's lab. This is a project looking at using virtual reality, virtual audio to train and to assess spatial listening skills in children with bilateral cochlear implants. And we know that speech perception is difficult in noisy environments for everyone, but more so for children with bilateral cochlear implants. Well, it's even more difficult if you just have one cochlear implant, but even if you have two, there are several reasons why speech in noise still needs improvement. So the cues for bilateral listening or binaural listening, like the ITDs and the ILDs, may be either not available because of the processing discarding the temporal fine structure, for example, or they may be distorted by the compression in the processor. There's also a mismatch in the place of stimulation within each ear, but also across ears. That mismatch is often very different. So that's also going to complicate things. And there are pathological factors as well that have to do with the hearing loss and the cause of the hearing loss. So there are a number of barriers to performance in terms of spatial listening skills. Despite this, we know that some cues are available, and we want to see with this project whether training the use of those cues could lead to remapping the existing cues and improving performance. And we know that there's some evidence already of this happening, underpinned by plasticity-driven changes in the auditory pathways. And this has been seen in children and adults. And so we think that trying this training is definitely a good idea. Motivated as well by the fact that routine assessments of listening in noise in the clinic do not reflect real life conditions. So often ears are tested separately or with collocated noise and speech. And also there are no protocols to optimize the programming of two implants together. Programming is often done separately for each device. And we know from the experience of young people with cochlear implants with whom we have worked, they have told us that everyday communication can be hard, that it may be difficult to combine the sounds from the two devices, and that this is particularly more difficult in background noise. So virtual reality and gamification present as a good option because it's appealing for children and young people, and it can be delivered remotely, with which we can promote engagement and equality of access as well. So we know as well that computer-based training can improve speech in noise. And particularly, I mean, this has also been tried with people with cochlear implants. And we know that multimodal training using visual information as well as auditory information is better than auditory alone. So with all these things in mind, we are working in this BEARS project. BEARS is a virtual reality intervention for children who are aged 8 to 16. It includes games to train speech in noise, localization, and spatial music listening. It is being evaluated nationwide in the UK. We have 14 centers at the moment, and we are comparing BEARS plus the usual care that children with bilateral cochlear implants receive with just the usual care alone. And this is possible because of a £2.5 million grant given to Deborah Vickers and Dan Jiang. And it's a National Institutes of Health and Care Research award across 5 years. And it is the first program grant for behavioral intervention with deaf children. I think this last point is really exciting, that we can assess this intervention in a program of this type. So thinking how BEARS may work. So we've got our target population of children who are aged 8 to 16, and they have bilateral cochlear implants. They need to have stable listening experience to enroll in the project. And we think that by providing training of spatial listening, music and speech in noise and localization games over 3 months for a minimum of 1 hour per week, over 2 sessions by virtue of change mechanisms that are related to plasticity-driven cue reweighting and remapping and enhancement by a multisensory integration. We can generalize what is learned by multimodal stimuli and cognitive engagement to lead to direct outcomes. And these direct outcomes are improved speech perception in noise, better sound localization, and reduced listening effort, to lead to changes in health provision, where young people self-administer their care partially, and they take responsibility for their own health. And we make this available to all, supporting equality in healthcare access. We know that sometimes services vary in their availability depending on where people live. So by doing this virtually, we have a possibility of extending access to everyone. This should promote health and well-being outcomes, like, for example, improved vocabulary, improved concentration and attention, improved communication, reduction of stress and anxiety, and improvement of quality of life. So all of this is the logic model behind the BEARS intervention. And behind the intervention and the program, there's a really, really big team. We've got most people on this slide, with the chief investigator and the co-chief investigator, Debbie Vickers and Dan Jiang. And you can see that there are several institutions involved. We've got engineers doing the visual audio, led by Lorenzo Piccinelli. We have a qualitative research team as well, doing interviews to understand the experiences of children. We've been working on the outcome measures at Cambridge. So it's a really, really big team behind the project. And one of the things that I have enjoyed the most being involved in this project is the co-production aspect, because we have devised everything from the very early days with a group of children and young people with cochlear implants. So we met them within what we call participant and public involvement, or patient and public involvement. And we had interviews with them. We had focus groups to define what the problem was that they needed us to solve, and what the solutions might be that were acceptable to them in terms of a program to do rehabilitation. Then we, after the first meeting, we developed prototypes, and we took them back to the group. And again, they gave feedback about the prototypes. And then we made changes based on that feedback, and we had several cycles of improvement. After a third phase, we could specify the details of BEARS, and the software components were finished. And the children created the logotype of the project, and they got really involved. And it was not only children and young people involved, there were also other stakeholders like engineers and speech and language therapists, music therapists, audiologists, teachers, and parents and friends. So we came up with the final prototypes, and this is a group of 3 different games, 3 different types of games. There's several complexity levels and activities. The first one is a spatial listening game, where you need to localize sounds in space, basically. And you have interferers, and you have background noise in the different complexity levels. You have visual cues at the beginning, then they blur away. The second one is a speech in noise game, where you have basically speech presented from different directions. The children wanted a cafeteria game, for example. So there's a cafeteria where the clients fly from space, and they order different things in different directions around the listener. And there's background noise to make it more complex. There's a phone ringing at the same time. So there are different levels, and you earn points like in any other game that children play. And lastly, there are the music games. And for these ones, there are exercises to understand the lyrics, or to discriminate across instruments, and to localize instruments in space. The way this is being assessed is through a randomized controlled trial. And we have now 14 centers involved. At the moment, we have 206 families who have consented. We aim for 272 children and young people involved. And they're randomized to one of two groups. One group continues to do the usual care, so the usual interventions that they have when they have bilateral cochlear implants and are under the care of an implant team. And the other group does that, but they do also the games. So they do the BEARS program as well. All children are seen at baseline, and they perform a series of outcome measures. And then they're seen again after 3 months. The children who were playing at that point stop playing, and we see them again at a year time, so 1 year after the baseline, to test for retention in case, if there was any learning from the games. We want to know whether that learning is still present a year down the line. And all of these not only tests for the outcome measures of speech, as I said before, there's qualitative interviews, and they have, so on the one hand with this, we want to understand the experiences of these children and young people in terms of listening, and we're also evaluating the process of the intervention itself. And, at the end, when we have the results, we really want to understand if the intervention was followed, if it worked, why did it work? If it didn't work, why it didn't work? Because all of that will help us for future work. And I don't yet have results of this trial because we are still carrying it out and it's blinded. So we don't really have results to share yet. But there's been a lot of transformation since we started the project, and we are doing things like mapping the usual care, for example. We are also getting to know how these children perform with cochlear implants, and we're going to have a snapshot of all the baseline sessions of these children with, performance in speech in noise, listening experiences, quality of life, emotional skills. So there's a very a richness of data that we'll have after this project, regardless of the result of the intervention. But we're also training implant teams to become competent in research, because really the people delivering the assessments on site are the clinicians seeing children every day, and I'm very grateful to them. We are all grateful in the VERS team. If there's anyone around, we want them to know that they're very much appreciated. They're learning. Well, some of them had experience, but they're engaging in research, and that for us is very important. And it can also have a strong impact in the future. So we have improved also patient experience, and we are collecting feedback about their outcomes. As I said before, we had a snapshot, and we also created outcome measures that I want to talk to you about in a moment. And this has to do with validating measures of speech done with iPads rather than loudspeakers. Importantly, there's another program grant that came from BEARS and is led by Helen Cullington, and she's looking at including people in research. So when we invite people for research, sometimes they say no. With this project, we want to know why they say no and how we can make participant cohorts more representative of everyone in that population, really. As I said before, the PPI aspect is also very important in this project. And the papers we generate, we make them available to all. We publish in open access so that the work we do can have a real impact in the clinic. So I just want to show you a few of the outcome measures that we are using in the VERS project, particularly because I think this can change the way we assess children in the clinic. And having more data may lead to better programming, after all, because it's what we really want. So I want to focus on the SIMBA, which is a test that is an adaptation of the spatial speech noise test. And we wanted with this test to capture some of the complexities of real conversation, where you have speech coming from different directions. There's usually multi-talker background in many places around us. And the person who's listening has to discriminate speech and has to locate the speaker in the circle around them or in the space around them. And this has to be done very quickly. So this test is not a real conversation situation. I found Giovanni's talk really, really interesting because I think it's really good to move towards natural speech. This is not exactly natural speech, but it does have some advantages compared to the typical clinically used assessments. So in this test, we have typically an array of loudspeakers in front of the listener. And in each trial, there are 2 words presented to them. One word comes from a random location around the speaker, and the other one comes from a speaker next to that initial place. And the listener has to choose among 4 words, the 2 words that were produced, and they have to indicate the direction of the shift from word 1 to word 2. And I just quickly want to show you that with this test, because we are using multi-talker bubble delivered either from the right or from the left of the speaker in each trial, we have scores as a function of the azimuth of the speech source for each direction of the noise. And that means that we can vary the separation of the speech and the noise, and we can collect the change in those scores. And you see here that for speech sources on the right and noise delivered from the right, we've got lower scores than when the noise is actually farther away from the speech. So as the speech goes to the left and the noise continues to come from the right, the speech scores go up. We have a similar profile, but opposite when we change the direction of the noise. So with this test, we can capture some aspects of spatial release from masking. And we can also capture listening effort because we've got reaction time captured. So normally you will do this with an array of speakers, but for the VERS project, we have implemented this into an iPad. And I want you to focus on this space here between this data point and this data point. So you can see that the flatter the line is, the less the listener benefits from the separation of the speech source. And here we do have a difference across all the azimuths. We have compared the performance for speech for word discrimination made with anechoic in an anechoic booth and in an iPad for with people who have typical hearing. These are children actually with typical hearing, and you can see that the profiles are very similar, which is promising because it means that you don't need equipment more than an iPad and space more than what you need for an iPad and headphones compared to needing a room with an array of loudspeakers and the space and taking care of the equipment in a clinical environment that often is quite challenging. And the profiles for relative localization are also quite similar. And we've done this with children with cochlear implants. And I was drawing your attention to that X shape before, and I wanted to notice that the lines are flatter because they're benefiting less from the separation of speech and noise. And the profile for localization seems also flatter. So we are learning a bit about their performance as well. So just to close, I just want to say that this is the first NIHR program grant for a behavioral intervention for children and young people with bilateral cochlear implants. We have over 200 participants that have enrolled in the trial across 14 centers in the UK to determine whether the intervention is effective. We have created tools like, for example, speech assessments that require only an iPad because they're done with virtual audio. And these virtual tools may improve access, promoting equality and inclusion. We're also learning about the listening experiences of all these children through the interviews that the qualitative research team is performing. And we are working with the clinics to see if we can use our virtual tools to deliver meaningful and complex clinical assessments with simple space and equipment requirements, not only perhaps to people with bilateral cochlear implants. These assessments could also be used for people with hearing aids, for example. Well, thank you for listening, and I'm now open to questions.